This terrifying asylum story was never supposed to be recorded, but I'm glad that it was. It started with a dare. Our group chat was filled with talk of ghost stories and urban legends. Everyone was sharing their scariest experiences. And after a few minutes of reading these horrifying tales, one person suggested we test one of the legends out ourselves. We weren't supposed to go near the old Glenview Asylum. It had been shut down for over 40 years now, ever since an outbreak of COVID had claimed the lives of most of the patients and staff. And I mean most. There wasn't a single person who hadn't lost their mind or their life in that place. Back in the day, it was said to be haunted by the spirits of those who suffered and died inside. But that wasn't why it had to be abandoned. No, locals said something else lived in there now. Something that wasn't human anymore. And this is where our story begins. We decided to meet up in front of the school library. Since it was a weeknight, we didn't have much time, so we agreed we'd only go inside if we could find somewhere safe to park nearby. Luckily, we found a spot only a few blocks away from the main entrance, and we made the walk over in near silence. I don't think anyone was really talking much. As we neared the gate, each of us were silently agreeing this was probably a bad idea. The asylum stood 2 stories tall and was easily one of the biggest buildings in town. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was the tallest. But that wasn't what made it stand out. It was the way it looked. The windows were boarded up, and the ones that weren't had long ago lost their glass panes, leaving gaping holes where the sun could pass through and tear apart the shadows inside. A few of the window frames were adorned with what looked like claw marks, but we couldn't be sure how long those had been there. We couldn't even be sure what kind of building this place had been before it became an asylum. Some said it was a hospital, others said a house of some sort. But the truth was, no one knew. The records had been lost decades ago, and all that was left behind were rumors, local legends, and ghosts. When we finally reached the front gates, we found them padlocked. Of course they were. Why would we have come here otherwise? We made our way around the structure until we found a side door that was slightly ajar. I swear it wasn't open when we started walking around, but it was now. Maybe the wind, right? We pushed the door open and slipped inside. The first thing we noticed was how silent it was. Normally, when you entered a place like this, you could hear hundreds of little noises. Creaking floorboards, rusting pipes, birds flying past. But this place was unnervingly silent. You could hear a pin drop. We walked down a long hallway lit only by our phones. And as we moved, we could feel our breath condensing in the air in front of us, telling us just how cold this place truly was. It was then we realized why we hadn't heard any birds or insects. There was no air, no ventilation, nothing. We took off our coats, but it was still freezing. Then we began to smell things. Not just the usual musty smell of an old building, but the smell of mold and iron. Iron. Like blood. This place was literally sucking the moisture out of our bodies, trying to consume us, drain us of all life. I felt something wet trickle down my face, and I assumed it was dirt from the ceiling. After all, it did look like it was caving in. But when I touched it, I found something else. Blood. It was warm. We were about to turn back when one of our friends pointed to something in the distance. She told us to look down a side hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The end of it was dark, even though it should have been flooded with light. The rest of us followed her gaze, and we saw it. At the end of the hallway was a door. It had the number 6A stenciled on it, and next to it was a sign that read, "Do not enter." But that wasn't the reason we stared at it in horror. No, that was because we knew what was behind it. Locals said something still lived in there. Something that wasn't human anymore. As we approached the door, we could feel our bodies begin to shake. We tried to speak, but no words came out. We looked at each other, terrified, knowing whatever was behind that door was reaching out, trying to drag us in. We wanted to run, but our legs felt frozen in place. Then one of our friends, Kevin, snapped out of it and broke into a sprint, barreling straight for the door. We all flinched when he touched it. He pounded his fist against it hard enough to make a dent, but it didn't budge. It was locked. One of his friends rushed over and pressed his ear against it. He said he could hear something moving around on the other side, something clawing, scratching, but he couldn't make out what it was. It was Kevin who found the first chain. It was hanging loose on the ground, connecting the doorknob to the hinges with a thick metal padlock. But it didn't take him long to realize it wasn't going to be so easy. If locals were to be believed, 6 chains would seal the door shut, and whoever or whatever was trapped inside wouldn't be able to break them. But locals also said that sometimes the chains mysteriously disappeared. There was no way to lock the door, no way to keep it sealed, and no one had ever come out of room 6A alive. Despite the risk, we needed to know what was in that room. Maybe there wasn't anything there at all. Maybe it was just an old storage closet, or maybe we could find some answers. Kevin searched the room and discovered the rest of the chains, 5 more connected to 5 more padlocks. He knelt down, feeling for a way to pick the lock, but it was too complicated for him. We were gonna need a proper locksmith. Fortunately, we found another kid at the end of the hall who knew how to pick locks. He worked quickly, and soon enough the door was free. We all stood there staring at the door, listening intently, waiting to hear what would happen next. When the first chain fell to the ground, we all flinched. Each of us were wondering what would come out, what would reach out and try to grab us. Would it be hostile? But it wasn't. Whatever was trapped inside was quiet. In fact, there was still nothing but the sound of our breathing. The second chain clanged to the floor and we cautiously approached the door, holding our flashlights in front of us. It was pitch black inside. When the third chain hit the ground, we pushed the door open. And as we did, we heard movement on the other side. Something wet and heavy was dragging itself closer. The fourth chain fell, and the creature on the other side let out a wet, guttural hiss. We all gasped and backed away, dropping our lights in the process. The door swung open further, and as it did, our flashlights flickered. We watched in horror as our lights sputtered and died, one by one, until we were left in total darkness. We heard movement on the other side of the door, and something began to whisper, a raspy, dry whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The creature was taking its sweet time, reveling in our fear, enjoying watching us squirm. We could feel its presence filling the room, coiling around us, trying to crush us. Then we heard it speak. It didn't say anything coherent. Instead, it whispered our names, but not in a voice we knew. It sounded like all of us speaking at once, and then it stopped. We were frozen in place, too afraid to move, too afraid to speak. Suddenly, we heard the door slam shut. We looked at each other, confused and scared, wondering what happened, wondering what was going on. But when one of us stepped forward to investigate, we found that the door wasn't there anymore. It wasn't closed. It was gone, vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a smooth wall. That's when the floor started bleeding. Thick black-red ooze poured from every crack, rising around our ankles, sticky and warm. And the shadows in the corners started crawling toward us, not moving with the light, but against it. It was then that Danny screamed. He was lifted into the air, his skin pulling away like wet tissue. His arms bent backward, eyes wide with terror. And then silence. Nothing but the sound of that thing chewing. I ran, blindly, until I hit cold metal. A bed frame bolted to the wall. It wasn't bolted to the wall, it was embedded in it. And under it, eyes. So many eyes. All open. None blinking. They blinked together in unison, and I swear they smiled at me. Something grabbed my ankle. Claws. And a second set of hands. Human hands, but nailed to the wrists. Rotting, jerking. I kicked free, scrambled up and out through a broken vent shaft. And I didn't stop running until I saw headlights. Now I'm home, but I haven't slept in 4 nights. Not since I saw my reflection blink, even though I didn't.